Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. On Tuesday, President Biden announced his first slate of federal judges. The list of nearly a dozen people for the federal bench is the first look at Democratic picks to shape the judiciary. The White House says the nominees, quote, reflect the full diversity of the American people. It comes after a significant number of lifetime appointments under the Trump administration. President Biden is also planning for the future in other ways. The White House has largely remained on message in the past few weeks, with events largely tied to issues Mr. Biden is polling well on: COVID-related economic relief and vaccination efforts. Earlier, he held a public signing to extend the Paycheck Protection Program.
It is a bipartisan accomplishment. Nearly 90,000 businesses are still in line, and there's money left. Without somebody signing this bill today, there are hundreds of thousands of people who could lose their jobs and small and family businesses that might close forever. And as you know, small business is the backbone of our economy, representing almost 50% of all the employees in America.
But after the pandemic, it looks like infrastructure is the administration's next big push. On Monday, the White House announced a series of federally subsidized wind projects. They include building turbines off the mid-Atlantic coast. The president heads to Pittsburgh Wednesday to announce specifics on his plan. It's expected to cost $3 trillion, but Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg says a mileage or gas tax will not be implemented to pay for it. Grace Segers, Zeke Miller, and Juana Summers join me now. Grace is a CBS News political reporter. Zeke is a CBSN political contributor and White House reporter for the Associated Press. And Juana is a political reporter for NPR. Welcome. It's good to have you all. Grace, on Wednesday, President Biden will unveil the first piece of a two-part infrastructure plan. What is in it, and why is it split in two?
So the first part of this two-pronged plan is going to be comprised of what you traditionally think of when you think of infrastructure. So we're talking about railroads, highways, airlines, public transportation, those ideas that you have of infrastructure being in this package. We're also expected to see something on broadband, something on affordable housing, and possibly something on the electrical grid. So this will all really be focused on very tangible manufacturing and infrastructure in terms of transportation ideas. Now, the second prong is probably going to be about education, healthcare, and because that's sort of different from infrastructure, the Biden administration is concerned that given the price tag, they're not going to be able to pass one big package that includes what you traditionally think of as infrastructure, in addition to the stuff on healthcare and education. So they're splitting it in two with the hopes of having it easier to be passed if it's a two-pronged solution instead of just one big package.
So, Zeke, to pick up on what Grace is saying there, what has the administration said about how the plan would be paid for, and how is it navigating the politics of getting it passed?
You know, what we've seen from the administration so far is that essentially a pledge that this plan is going to largely broadly reflect what the president talked about in the campaign. So that means raising the corporate tax rate, looking for ways to close loopholes in the tax system, particularly when it comes to offshore companies or large net worth individuals who find ways to sort of hide income from the U.S. income tax system. Those are sort of the main ones. We've heard the president himself say that no American earning less than $400,000 would see a tax increase there as part of that plan. But all of that is going to be a bit of a challenge. You know, we've heard some openness rhetorically from the part of Republicans to engage in some sort of infrastructure spending, recognizing that it is undeniable looking around this country that there is infrastructure spending that needs to be made to keep up those bridges, roads, tunnels, railways, and the like. But when it comes to tax increases, that may be a bridge too far for some Republicans. So the question will end up being, in Congress, to what extent will this be "quote unquote" paid for? Will the spending be offset by tax increases? The White House isn't sort of putting target on that and saying what is an acceptable level of deficit spending. They're going to leave it to lawmakers on Capitol Hill to haggle out over the next couple of months as they try to win over some Republican support for this legislation.
All right, bridge too far. I did catch that, Zeke Miller. I'm paying attention. Very, very clever. Juana, earlier we mentioned that the president rolled out his first batch of judicial nominees. What can you tell us about them, and how important is it to the administration to fill these vacancies?
Yeah, so I think this is something that is incredibly important to the administration. This is an example of where President Biden is demonstrating his intent to make the judiciary more diverse, not just by way of the ethnicities of the people that we saw rolled out today, but also by way of the types of professions that they come from. We know that under his only term in office, President Trump saw on one confirmation of more than 200, I believe it was around 220 judges. Most of those were white and male. And so this list is a stark departure. This is an attempt by President Biden to remake the judiciary in pretty short order. He said that the federal bench should represent the full diversity of the American people. And so that's why we see him taking these steps now and taking these steps quickly while Democrats do have control of the Senate so that these folks are able to win confirmation, ultimately be a part of the bench.
Well, Grace, let's turn to another topic. I know that you have some new reporting on the White House taking some new steps to respond to the increase in violence against Asian Americans. What have you learned?
Yes, so my colleague Weijia Jiang and I have learned that the White House is launching several new initiatives and actions in order to address bias and violence against AAPI. So what we're going to be seeing is a reinstatement of the White House initiative on Asian American Pacific Islanders and expanding the mandate of that board to include addressing anti-Asian violence and bias. We're going to be seeing an interagency initiative across the Department of Justice in order to address anti-Asian violence and bias. Also going to be seeing the creation of a subcommittee within the pre-existing committee on COVID-19 that the White House has established. And that subcommittee is going to be specifically focused on xenophobia and on inequities in treatment in COVID-19. And finally, another really big part of this is going to be allocation of funds from the American Rescue Plan that Biden just signed into law that will aid survivors, Asian American survivors of domestic violence and domestic abuse through special community programs that help with language barriers and are specifically tailored to different communities. So several new actions coming up from the White House to address violence against AAPI people.
And Grace, how much pressure was the administration under to do more to address violence against Asian Americans?
The administration was under a significant amount of pressure, particularly given the mass shootings earlier this month that saw 8 people killed, including 6 women of Asian descent. And also a lot of activists in the Asian American community really frustrated that President Biden hadn't named any Asian Americans to the permanent 15 cabinet posts. So there is a lot of frustration, and we saw Senators Mazie Hirono and Tammy Duckworth, who are part of the Asian American caucus in Congress. For a minute there, they were threatening that they weren't going to confirm any of the nominees that the Biden administration put forth unless the Biden administration committed to naming some AAPI nominees. Now, the White House very quickly agreed to this ultimatum, and Hirono and Duckworth rescinded this threat. But it definitely shows that the White House is concerned about losing support from the AAPI community and also from AAPI senators, and that they recognize that this is a really big issue right now, particularly a year into the pandemic and with such a dramatic rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans.
That's something that I know a lot of folks are continuing to watch closely. Another issue, Juana, that folks are really continuing to keep a close eye on is this issue of gun violence. So today marks 40 years since the attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan. And White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki today was asked about potential action on gun violence. Let's go ahead and listen to some of what she said.
Right now, we're working on a couple of levers. One is working with Congress. There are 2 background check bills that have moved their way through the House. Many of you may have seen this weekend, Senator Chris Murphy, clearly a leader on these issues, somebody who has been a leader since Newtown and even before, sees a path forward. We've seen an openness by even some Republicans to having a debate and a discussion. We'll take that. While that is moving, while there are discussions on that front, and the president will certainly be engaged in those, we are also continuing to review and consider what the options are for executive actions. We hope to have an update on that soon.
So, Juana, last week you reported that the Biden administration was already holding meetings with key stakeholders focused on this issue before the recent mass shootings in Boulder and the Atlanta area. What were those meetings focused on, and what do gun violence prevention advocates want the White House to focus on now?
Yeah, that's right. This was clearly an area in which the White House did not want to be reactive, as these debates over gun violence in this country often are. They wanted to handle it deliberately. So in the last month or so, they've been holding meetings with a number of groups from the more establishment gun groups that you might have heard of, as well as community violence prevention advocates who work in urban communities across the country that are dealing with everyday gun violence to kind of suss out what some responses might be. So a lot of the White House's public discussion has been about those 2 bills that passed the House recently, who would both focus on strengthening the nation's background checks. But the big thing that I hear, whether it is talking to more establishment gun groups or folks who are working on community violence prevention, is that they can't wait. They were incredibly heartened to hear President Biden say the day after that horrific shooting in Boulder, Colorado, that he could not wait another minute to address that. And they were equally concerned when they heard the president at his first news conference as president of the United States say, as a response to a question about the nation's gun laws, that it's a matter of timing and successful presidents need to know how to prioritize. And then he pivoted to the issue of infrastructure that we started talking about, that is his focus this week and his next legislative priority. They feel that gun violence in this country is at unacceptable levels. It kills roughly 40,000 people each year. They want to see the president step out and act to take executive action. And one thing specifically that they were calling on is for the administration to make good on a promise that President Biden made as a candidate to devote as much as $900 million over 8 years to community violence prevention efforts in urban communities that are dealing with these kind of violent acts every day. And these are the kind of things that these advocates say won't be solved by things like an assault weapons ban, things like tightening the nation's background checks. They want to see action that includes them, too.
We want to thank Grace Segers, Zeke Miller, and Juana Summers. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.